Joan Biskupic is one of America's finest court reporters who now covers legal affairs for Reuters News. Breaking In, The Rise of Sonia Sotomayor is her third book on a member of the U.S. Supreme Court. Can't stop yourself. Who is next? Who's in your crosshairs
That's what people
next?
keep asking, but I did hit really the three most interesting, don't you think?
Yeah, very interesting, and historic figures in their own ways.
That's right.
Let me ask you, while we're on that subject of the previous books, some comparison and contrast. How does this book compare as far as more difficult, easier? How has it been?
It was harder because with Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, our first woman justice on the Supreme Court, and with Antonin Scalia, who so embodied the Ronald Reagan revolution for the courts, I could do full biographies. They had both served for decades when I actually wrote about them. Sonia Sotomayor, I decided to do in terms of political history, not a straight biography, because I wanted to look at her rise as it coincided with the trajectory of Latinos in America.
So a very different approach, because now you're talking about a process. How does one become a Supreme Court justice?
That's right.
Not just who are they.
That's right. And I wanted to pick up where her memoir left off. And of course, she wrote about her childhood, her difficulties in the Bronx, growing up as a Puerto Rican American. And what I did was essentially take part of that story, but then enhance it to look at how she, as I said, how her arc of her life matched Latinos in America. And then I wanted to devote the end of the book to what she's done on the Supreme Court so far. And as I was going along, she kept giving me more and more of a story because she became such a dynamic justice even in these first 5 years.
And I've read many of the reviews and comments on Amazon and other places, and a lot of people say, you should read both books, read them together because they complement each other.
Yes, I hope so. Wouldn't you love to be a million bestseller the way she was?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Speaking of her, any feedback directly from the justice?
No, she gave me several interviews under certain conditions, given that she was herself writing her own memoir during that time. And as soon as I got a copy, an early copy, I sent one up to Chambers, and I haven't heard back. And the other justices were critical to this story too, because they gave me some behind the scenes in terms of her actions, especially on affirmative action at the Supreme Court. So I haven't heard from them, but I don't go fishing either.
So the conventional wisdom, or maybe I could call it maybe our most hopeful delusion, is that somehow the court is above politics. Now, in recent years, that's taken a hit, that image. But you tell a story of someone who is very active in promoting herself. It's really fascinating. And so it leads me to the question, becoming a Supreme Court justice, is it more a factor of chance, or is it more a factor of a campaign over time that pays off?
It's all of the above. Sonia Sotomayor had the right stuff. She had been on lower courts for 17 years. She was a graduate of Princeton. She was a graduate of Yale Law School. She came with deep experience and a vast network. She had both. And not only did she have both, she also had this demographic difference. She became the first Latina on the Supreme Court. And in fact, President Obama, right from the start, knew that she would be in the mix for any kind of short list that he would consider. He had closer friends in the legal community who he was considering, namely Diane Wood from the Seventh Circuit, also Elena Kagan, who he put on his, who he named to be the first Solicitor General of the United States. But even back in 2009, right after he had taken office, he said, Sonia Sotomayor needs to be in the mix, even though he had never met her. So for her, it was a combination of what she stood for in terms of the American dream, but also the fact that she was credentialed. She had definitely gotten her legal ticket stamped, and then she had this great network of people who helped her.
And then when he did meet her, he was very impressed.
Oh, he was bowled over. In fact, that interview made a difference. He was not sold on her until the interview.
And it was, what was it particularly about her that was compelling to him?
Well, the fact that she, first of all, that she was someone who had this deep experience, but also did not forget where she had come from. And here we had our first African-American president who understood that, who understood the connections to the community that he felt were important to maintain despite how far you might move from it. She moved from the Bronx, but she always carried the Bronx in her heart.
I was born in the Bronx. Justice O'Connor, right woman, right time?
Exactly. She was.
Here we are
she
again.
was.
Right
she
woman,
was.
right time.
And in Justice O'Connor's case, actually, she wasn't as credentialed. But at that time, in 1981, there weren't as many women who, for example, had been on the federal bench, and Justice O'Connor herself had not been on the federal bench, and she had risen to an intermediate court in Arizona, but she hadn't even been on the top court in Arizona. But she was one wise woman herself. In fact, she politically networked so much that I used to say that she came to Washington knowing how to count votes, and for her it was counting to 5.
Wow.
In the conference.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of the being the first something,
Yes.
There's quite a burden with that, and it's tough to
Yes.
be judged on your merits when you are this other thing, this historical thing. You quote Dana Milbank in the book where he said biography over brains. It sounds too simplistic. Talk about her capacity to be a Supreme Court justice. She's not just the first Latina.
Definitely not, and she's that plus. And as I said, she had this experience of 17 years on lower courts, most recently on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, based in New York. So she knew how to be a judge, and I did think that kind of criticism certainly was a shorthand for some of her critics' complaints. But she was stung by that. She said, "Tell me why someone would suggest that I wasn't up to the job, other than the fact that I was a Hispanic woman." Mm-hmm. And I think she felt like she was both an affirmative action baby, to use her term, at one point in her career, but also someone who proved that she could go further and she could take advantage of the opportunities that were given to her. In fact, that's her point, is that both on the law, as she has continued to vote for affirmative action, but then also in her own personal story, she felt she rose to the expectations that someone might have if she got a boost along the way.
Yeah, we all get a break somehow,
Right.
and then we either fall on our face or not.
Yeah,
right. And, but even in spite of that,
Yes.
you end the book, you talk about the fact that no matter her legal legacy, she's still going to be, that will be eclipsed by the public face of the first Latina Supreme Court justice.
And also the way she's used it. How many justices have dropped the ball on New Year's Eve in Times Square? 1. How many justices have appeared on the Muppets twice, or I'm using the old term, the Muppets on Sesame Street twice? She's out. Yes, exactly. It was a slip. It was a fond slip. But she's out there, and not only is she redefining what it's like to be a Latina justice, she's redefining what it's like to be a justice out among the people. She is out among the people more than anyone else on this current court.
Well, Joan, thanks for joining us. Thanks for another great book, and we do look forward to see who you'll write about next, because it will be someone.
It will be. Thank
Thanks.
you. Thanks, John.